The 20th century model of military occupation is a relic of a bygone age. It is a doctrine of brute force, defined by the presence of foreign soldiers on sovereign soil, a flag raised over a conquered capital, and the direct, overt administration of a defeated populace. This model has been proven, time and again, to be astronomically costly, politically unsustainable, and ultimately ineffective in achieving long-term strategic objectives. The modern practitioner of statecraft understands that true control is not achieved by the deployment of armies, but by the subtle and systematic co-option of a nation's core functions. This has given rise to a new and far more sophisticated doctrine, the invisible occupation. Its objective is not to conquer a territory, but to control it, to achieve the outcomes of a successful occupation without a single combat soldier ever crossing the border. The central principle of this doctrine is the preservation of the target nation's illusion of sovereignty. The nation continues to have its own government, its own army, and its own seat at the United Nations. Its citizens continue to believe they are masters of their own destiny. Yet, the critical decisions that shape their future are made in a distant capital by an unseen and unacknowledged power. This is the art of achieving total strategic control while maintaining perfect, plausible deniability. It is a war waged not with tanks and infantry, but with finance, with information, with culture, and with the careful, scientific manipulation of a nation's ruling class. It is the empire of influence, not of direct rule. This is an analysis of that doctrine, a clinical dissection of the methods by which a modern global power can achieve the complete and lasting control of a foreign territory, all without leaving a single visible footprint of its own soldiers. The first and most efficient pillar of the invisible occupation is the principle of political control through elite capture. The amateur thinks of controlling a nation by controlling its millions of citizens. The professional understands that it is far more efficient to control the 100 key individuals who rule those millions. This process begins with a deep, granular intelligence analysis of the target nation's power structure. The objective is to identify the key elites in every critical sector, the political class, the senior military command, the major industrial and financial figures, and the influential leaders in media and academia. For each of these key individuals, a detailed psychological and vulnerability profile is developed. The MICE framework, money, ideology, coercion, ego is applied. Is the minister driven by greed? Is the general a secret true believer in a compatible ideology? Does the media mogul have a hidden vice that can be used as leverage? Once these vulnerabilities and motivations are understood, a systematic campaign of co-option and control is initiated. This is not a crude process of bribery, but a sophisticated long-term relationship-building exercise. For the elite driven by money, lucrative and deniable business opportunities are created. They are offered partnerships in offshore corporations, given access to favorable investment deals, or their family members are granted prestigious positions on the boards of international companies. Their financial interests become inextricably linked with the interests of the occupying power. For the elite driven by ideology, a different approach is taken. They are cultivated as intellectual partners. They are invited to exclusive international conferences. Their work is praised in prestigious journals, and they are made to feel like they are part of a global movement for progress and enlightenment, a movement that just happens to align perfectly with the occupying power's foreign policy. For the elite driven by ego, the approach is one of constant and subtle flattery. They are treated as indispensable strategic partners. Their advice is sought, their wisdom is praised, and they are given access to the corridors of power in the foreign capital. Their need for recognition is fed until they become a willing agent of the hand that feeds them. And for the elite who cannot be co-opted, the lever of coercion is applied. Through sophisticated intelligence gathering, compromising material, or compromat, is collected. The threat of exposing this material, whether it relates to financial corruption or personal indiscretions, is often enough to ensure quiet compliance. The end result of this process is a captured elite. This is a ruling class that, to its own people, appears to be sovereign and independent. They deliver speeches about national pride, they pass laws, and they command their own armies. But their most critical decisions are guided, shaped, and often dictated by their unseen foreign patrons. The second pillar of the invisible occupation is military control through surrogate forces. The core principle of this doctrine is that the occupying power's own soldiers must never be used in combat roles on the target nation's soil. The fighting, the policing, and the dying must be done by locals. This is achieved through two primary and complementary models: foreign internal defense, FID, and unconventional warfare, UW. The choice of model depends on the nature of the target state. In a state with a friendly or potentially friendly government, the FID model is employed. The occupying power's special operations forces and intelligence services are deployed, not as combat units, but as advisors. Their mission is to train, fund, equip, and advise the host nation's own military, police, and intelligence services. These host nation forces are then used to secure the state's territory, to fight insurgencies, and to suppress any internal opposition to the ruling captured elite. The occupying power achieves its military objectives, but the actions are carried out by the legitimate forces of the sovereign state. It is controlled by partnership. In a state that is ruled by a hostile regime, the UW model is employed. The process is the same, but the target partner is different. Instead of the official government, the occupying power identifies and supports a local resistance movement or a proxy force. These insurgents are then covertly trained, armed, and advised, just as a friendly army would be. They are provided with intelligence, logistical support, and a guiding strategic hand. They then prosecute a war against the hostile regime. If the proxy force is successful, it overthrows the old government and establishes a new one that is friendly to the interests of the occupying power. The external power has achieved a regime change without a single one of its own soldiers ever participating in an overt invasion. The victory is deniable, and the new government is indebted. In both the FIDIAC and UW models, the external hand remains almost completely invisible. The number of foreign advisors on the ground is minuscule. They operate in the shadows, as mentors and enablers. The face of the conflict is always a local one. This is the art of controlling a nation's military destiny by proxy. The third pillar of the invisible occupation is economic control through strategic investment. A nation that is politically and militarily aligned but economically independent is not a nation that is truly controlled. Therefore, the target nation's economy must be brought into a state of managed dependency. This is achieved not through colonial-style plunder, but through the modern, seemingly benevolent mechanisms of foreign investment and development aid. The occupying power, either through its state-owned enterprises or its allied multinational corporations, begins a program of strategic investment in the target nation. These investments are not random. They are focused on the nation's most critical and valuable economic infrastructure. This includes its seaports, its airports, its railway and communication networks, its energy grid, and its most valuable natural resources, such as mines or oil fields. Under the guise of modernization and partnership, the occupying power gains a controlling interest in the very arteries of the target nation's economic life. The host nation receives new infrastructure and jobs, but it pays a hidden price: the loss of its economic sovereignty. A nation that does not control its own ports cannot control its own trade. A nation that does not control its own energy grid cannot power its own industries without permission. A nation that does not control its own communications network cannot guarantee the privacy of its own government. This economic dependency becomes a powerful and permanent lever of control. If the captured political elite ever considers a policy that is contrary to the interests of the occupying power, a quiet threat to turn off the investment tap is often all that is needed to ensure compliance. Political defiance becomes a form of national economic suicide. The fourth pillar is informational control through narrative dominance. The most stable and permanent form of occupation is the one in which the occupied population has been psychologically conditioned to accept the occupier's worldview as its own. This is the realm of soft power, and it is the most sophisticated front in the silent war. The objective is to achieve a state of cultural and intellectual hegemony. The goal is to make the occupying power's values, its political system, and its way of life seem like the natural, desirable, and inevitable future for all modern nations. This is accomplished through a variety of means. The occupying power will fund and support local media outlets, newspapers, television stations, and influential websites that promote a friendly narrative. It will establish cultural centers and language schools that act as conduits for its own cultural values. It will offer generous scholarships and exchange programs for the target nation's brightest students, who are brought to the occupying powers' universities to be educated and indoctrinated. These individuals then return home to become the next generation of captured elites in academia, media, and government. The educational curriculum of the target nation's schools and universities is also subtly influenced, often through the funding of academic departments or the provision of educational materials. A new generation is taught a version of their own history and a view of the world that is in perfect alignment with the interests of the unseen power. This is a quiet and long-term form of conquest. It is the colonization of a nation's mind. When the people of a country have come to admire and emulate their occupiers, the need for any other form of control becomes almost obsolete. The actors who execute this complex, multi-domain doctrine are not soldiers in the conventional sense. They are the unseen operators, the quiet professionals who work behind a veil of plausible deniability. The primary actor is the intelligence officer, the human specialist who is the master of elite capture. He is the psychologist, the relationship manager, and the puppeteer who pulls the political strings from the shadows. Then there is the special forces advisor, the quiet professional who trains and mentors the surrogate military force. He is the modern-day Lawrence of Arabia, a military catalyst who can transform a disorganized band of rebels into a potent fighting force. There is also the economic attaché, often operating under diplomatic or corporate cover. He is the agent of economic statecraft, the man who negotiates the strategic investments and aid packages that create a state of permanent dependency. And finally, there is the cultural diplomat, the public affairs officer, the academic, and the NGO worker. These are the soldiers on the soft power front, the purveyors of the narrative, the teachers who re-educate a nation in the image of their patron. These are the architects of the invisible occupation. How, then, does this system deal with genuine indigenous resistance to its control? The beauty of the doctrine is that the occupying power never has to deal with it directly. It makes the host nation police itself. The captured elite, whose power and wealth now depend on the stability of the system, will use the security forces that the occupying power has trained and equipped the FIDE model to crush any internal dissent. The controlled media will be used to frame the resistance not as a patriotic movement, but as a group of terrorists, extremists, or agents of a rival foreign power. The population, having been subjected to a long campaign of narrative dominance, will be inclined to believe this. The invisible occupation thus achieves a state of perfect self-policing control. The dirty work of repression is carried out by the host nation's own government, against its own people, preserving the benevolent and hands-off image of the external power. To illustrate, consider a fictionalized case study of a friendly takeover. A strategically located but politically unstable nation is identified. Its leadership is weak and corrupt. The occupying power initiates an elite capture operation, securing the loyalty of key ministers and generals through a combination of economic incentives and covert leverage. Simultaneously, a robust foreign internal defense mission is established. Special forces teams are sent in, not to fight, but to advise. They retrain the nation's army, provide it with modern equipment, and build a powerful and loyal counterterrorism unit that is, in reality, a Praetorian Guard for the captured regime. Vast sums of development aid are poured into the country, but they are channeled through companies allied with the occupying power and into projects that serve its strategic interests, such as the modernization of a key seaport or the construction of a pipeline. The nation becomes economically dependent. The media landscape is slowly reshaped through the funding of independent news outlets that promote a pro-occupation narrative. Over time, the nation becomes a stable, reliable, and perfectly aligned client state. It is, for all practical purposes, occupied territory. Yet, not a single foreign combat soldier has been deployed, and the nation's sovereignty remains, on paper, entirely intact. The hostile takeover follows a similar logic, but a different path. In a nation ruled by an adversary, an unconventional warfare model is employed. Intelligence assets identify and assess a viable internal opposition group. Covert relationships are established. The group is provided with funding, with training, and with arms, all through deniable third-party channels. Special forces advisors are infiltrated to provide strategic guidance. Simultaneously, a massive psychological and information warfare campaign is launched to delegitimize the hostile regime, to highlight its brutality and corruption, and to build popular support for the insurgency. The proxy force begins a guerrilla campaign, targeting the regime's weak points and eroding its control. Eventually, the regime, weakened from within and without, collapses. The proxy force takes power and establishes a new government. This new, friendly government, having been brought to power by the unseen hand of the external state, is now deeply indebted and perfectly aligned with its interests. The hostile territory has been pacified and brought under control again, without a single shot being fired by an overt, invading army. This, in its totality, is the doctrine of the invisible occupation. It is the new paradigm for the 21st century empire. It is an empire of influence, not of direct rule, a model of control that is more subtle, more cost-effective, and more politically sustainable than any colonial model of the past. The nations that are subject to this form of control are not colonies. They are client states, protectorates, and strategic partners. They retain their flags, their anthems, and their illusions of independence. But their economic, their military, and their political destinies are guided from afar. It is a form of power that is profoundly difficult to resist, for it is often impossible to even see. It does not confront its subjects with a clear and identifiable enemy. It presents itself as a friend, a partner, a benevolent guide on the path to modernity and progress. The end result is a new and stable world order, a peace that is carefully managed and controlled by a handful of great powers. But it is a peace that is built upon a foundation of compromised sovereignty and the slow, quiet, and often invisible death of true national independence.